from the beautiful metaverse, and more particularly from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And one of the things we're doing here is preparing for the lustration of the ancestors in the spring, which will also be the investiture of the new first priest and priestess. And it will be the first double investiture since 1979. So, very well worth coming to. There'll be much more information about this later, but it's very high in my mind at the moment, so I thought I would mention it. I also want to take a moment to mention the Corellian Book of the Dead, which has just become available quite recently. The first shipment has gone out, the second shipment is going out today or tomorrow, and we're hoping to have every copy that's been ordered out in the mail more or less immediately. And then hopefully sell some more copies. The Book of the Dead is exactly what it sounds like. It is the Corellian view of death, dying, and the afterlife, the nature of the soul and incarnation. And hello to Lynn in the chat room. And I missed my. I was so enthusiastic about illustration. I missed my little spiel about wherever you are watching this program, whatever platform, you can type your questions or comments directly into it. They'll show up in my chat room. We can talk directly. And I love talking directly with you. So please use that feature. Um, Today, my subject is fundraising. As you know, the last couple of days, I was talking about politics and the need for political vigilance going into the future. Oh, and hello to Lolan in the chat room. It's good to see you, Lolan. And today I was going to talk about something that the pagan community needs just as much, and if possible, likes to discuss even less, which is fundraising. And hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you. And I really do love seeing all of the people who are with us for the live broadcast. I know there are many people who join after the live broadcast and see it um, in its recorded form, and that's wonderful too. But I do enjoy the fact that we can have some actual live conversation. So I'm going to start my conversation about fundraising by pointing out that if you're just a person going on your personal spiritual path, it's not really a subject you need to worry about. Um, except maybe with buying whatever books or materials you feel you need. But chances are you have the funds for that. But if you're running any kind of organization or taking part in any kind of project, fundraising is something you really should be aware of, because these things, I'm not going to say they don't fund themselves, but they certainly don't do it automatically. It is possible for a project to fund itself. And the Book of the Dead, which I was just showing you, is an example of that, because we put it up for pre-order before we brought it out, allowing people to pre-order their copies, giving us the money to make the initial order. So in its way, it did kind of pay for itself, um, rather than someone having to pull the money for that first order out of pocket. And that's possible because of current technology. But generally speaking, whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's the local witches ball, whether you're running um, a church, a a school, a a pagan pride day, whatever it is, there are likely to be expenses. And unless you're willing to pay everything yourself, which you may not even be able to do, depending on what the project is, you need to look at fundraising as part of what you're doing. And hello to Brian in the chat room. Good to see you, Brian. Um, I think I said hello to Mary. If not, hello, Mary. It's good to see you. Um, One of the things I've been involved in a lot of projects that had to have a lot of fundraising over the course of the 40 odd years, nearly 50 years of well, basically 50 years of my pagan career. Hello to Tom in the chat room. Hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see all of you. Um, so I have a few things I can say about fundraising, including the fact that it can be very difficult to do a project without it. Now, Brian says, how do we make fundraising more equitable, making sure people know the project gets done? I'm thinking of this for my planner, and that has sometimes been an issue in the pagan community. Um, people find that they pre-order something, for example, and it doesn't actually come to pass. I think part of my answer to that is um, track record. I mean, the project will get done if you're working with people who have a habit of getting their projects done. Um, and it is worth saying there can be problems that arise in fundraising. I'm thinking of a prominent pagan gathering. I'm not going to say whom. And by not saying whom, it actually could apply to a number of them, where funds were raised and someone just pocketed them. That does happen. And hello to Joshua in the chat room, and hello to Jeanette in the chat room. But it doesn't happen often. And the ones I'm thinking of went ahead and provided the service anyway. Um, but it did make things more difficult. And Joshua asks, how versed are you on astrology? Well, I've written several classes and books on the subject, but I do have some background in astrology. We were talking about that the other day. But generally speaking, I think that you know I often describe myself as being a grinder. And what I mean by that is Sir Edward and I both describe ourselves as grinder, that we will grind through and get done what we're doing, regardless of what is necessary. Um, that's actually how you can tell whether something's going to come to pass. If you're dealing with people who are going to give up if it becomes difficult, or who will keep going. And nobody ever made any money betting that I would not be there the following year. And even with nearly dying, here I am, still doing all the same things. And even had I died, I think I would still be an influence. Um, Now, Brian says he thinks it's very important to show the steps you've made so far. The timeline of what's next may help. It depends on how long your timeline is. When I did the Book of the Dead, I talked a little bit about the fact that I was making progress with it where I was. From start to finish, it was a couple of months. Moving quickly with a project certainly doesn't help, or certainly does not hurt, um, with the track record of fundraising. If people know that you have brought out many projects, and you look at things I've done. You have the Tarot of Hecate. You have all the different degree books. You have the Book of the Dead. You have the Omnibus. And some of those have taken months to fulfill. The second degree, there are people who feel the second degree is cursed because every time I do anything involving second degree, it takes forever. Um, and it also has to do with just how thick the second degree is. Um, but every one of these had to be fundraised. Um, Now, Joshua remarks that their motto is that astrology, numerology, and palmistry all sing the same song using different instruments. I would agree with that. I think I'd ultimately say that in one way or another of all forms of divination. But certainly those that deal heavily with personal character, absolutely. And I think that seeing the similarities in things is very important. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things one can do for fundraising before the half hour gets away from me. One of the things we commonly do now is pre-ordering what it is that you're offering. And this allows you to get the money in advance to make that first order. Otherwise, it can be very hard. Um, Now, Lolan says, is a statement of accountability required for how the funds are spent? Can personal expenses and spending such as food, rent, travel be considered justifiable part of the fundraising goals? I'd have to say that depends on who's doing it and what they're saying, but generally speaking, you should say exactly what you're raising the funds for. And you should stick to that, particularly if you are any sort of legal institution. And if you're raising funds for a project, they should not be used for personal expenses as such. That does not mean that there can be no recompense for the people doing the work. Um, and ideally, there should be. Um, but that doesn't necessarily happen. Now, Sir Edward says, yes, it can be used for any purpose as stated. And that's exactly the case. If you say you're raising it for all these purposes, of course you can use it that way. If you say you're raising it for just the one thing, you should use it for just the one thing. Hello to Eve in the chat room. Um, but some of the things that I have taken part in for fundraising have included, for example, auctions. And in some ways, we kind of introduced the idea of auctions for fundraising into the wider pagan community. They're much more common now, but we've had tremendous success with annual auctions, biannual auctions, to which people donate items that then go, um, well, for the Corellian Church, who does those particular auctions, it goes to running the church and everything involved in running the church. Um, I've also been involved in auctions that were to support a particular project where the funds are for only that project, as opposed to going into the general fund of the church. Um, I've been involved in telethons, which are basically the same concept, but a little more colorful, and in their way more fun. Um, a great deal of money was raised for the Order of Paladins for the Parliament of World Religions through a telethon. Very good. Many years ago, we were involved in raising money to help with relief after, I believe it was the Great Tsunami in Southeast Asia. That was very fun. Now, Magical Mermaid says if you're a writer, you may need to travel for research or purchase a program or device, which may cost money. And she's absolutely right about that. Um, Sometimes what those expenses are, um, I mean, you may need to to have um, certain items of technology that you will need to do your project. That's something you can raise money for. You might need to have travel to a particular location. That can be a perfectly appropriate thing to raise money for. You might need to um, have any number of things, and they are all potentially quite appropriate. And people don't think about them. A lot of times in our community, people think if someone's raising money, it's purely for themselves, and it's almost never that way. All of these projects cost a certain amount of money, even if only the person's time. Um, but if we go back to the Book of the Dead, I cannot say I got anything for the time that I spent putting this together. The cost was for the printing and the postage. Um, Now Joshua says, why doesn't a GoFundMe work for this? Um, and I've never worked with a GoFundMe, but we've done Indiegogo, we've done Kickstarter for various projects, and they were quite successful, and they can work very well. So in my list of things that you can do for fundraising, I highly recommend them. Um, Again, you want to be very clear on what the money is for, and you want to make sure you use it that way. The other side um, to the community being shy of fundraising is that there are people who just don't do it well. But generally, you can go by someone's track record. And we do have a problem in this community, however, and that's poverty consciousness, which even after all these years is still an issue. And there are some people who are jealous of any success and will discount discount any kind of fundraising as being personal rather than project related because of their personal prejudices. And I think this is not unique to the pagan community, it's unique to poor communities who don't feel themselves having many options. And while we don't think of the United States as being a poor country, many parts of it actually are. Much of this country is quite a poor country with a wealthy upper class, and other parts have a wealthy middle class. But I think for some people in the pagan community, because they see no way to increase their own standing, they cannot understand how anything can be done, and this causes them to take a very negative view. I also think that's one of the worst problems in this community, and does not really require a lot of sympathy. I am so tired of pagan poverty consciousness that I really have nothing good to say about it at this point. And and Janet says, I'm still waiting on my copy. I pre-ordered it 6 days ago. Well, it's a physical copy. It's not a download. It doesn't get there in 24 hours. Um, it takes a little while to put it together and to mail it. And you're working with actual people. And sometimes it does take a little while. And it's actually sitting in the pile behind me, but you can't see it. So it should be to you shortly. And they're on their way. I and these things all take a great deal of human effort, and I think people tend to forget that. But getting back to fundraising, if you want to have them, they they need to be done and they need to be financed, or they're not going to occur. And I see people who talk about things they'd like to see in the community, but someone's going to have to do it, and and they will need money to do it. We were talking earlier about the illustration. It's going to take thousands of dollars to stage that event, and that money is going to have to come from somewhere. It will, it always does, but it takes organization, it takes doing, and I think people tend to forget that. Um, and I'm making the mistake of falling into the chat room um, and Janet says, "Thank you." Yeah, I mean it. So to give you an example of what happens in the everyday world, as I was preparing all of these for printing, I ran out of computer ink, so I had to go and get more, which of course required money in itself, but also required a relatively long trip to get it here in Danville, and so that delayed things by a day or so, and things like that happen. Um, Now, as I say, I was reading a comment in the chat room, which is way off of our subject, but I'm gonna go back to it. And Joshua is talking about he's talking about things that his father could do, and also they've seen the departed return often, and no one mentions any god or devil. Um, and although that's a completely different subject that we've talked about in the past and will in the future, yes, you're absolutely right. When you talk to the deceased, you don't, as a general rule, hear anything like that. Um, it is for something that certain people put so much emphasis on. The world of spirit doesn't seem to do that. So, getting back to fundraising, There are all kinds of different things you do. One of the things I've done often is offer original artwork. Earlier this year, I was offering jewelry from my family collection to raise money to make the trip to Danville. Um, and I'm very grateful for all the support that I got on that and everything else. And for Jeanette, as I say, the book is actually in its package, ready to go. Um, Hello to Jason. Oh, hello to Byron in the chat room, and Byron Ballard. And Byron says the nonprofit world has great resources for fundraising. Yes, that's true. And many of our people aren't particularly aware of that, or don't take good advantage of it. Byron, as you surely know, Byron Ballard is the well-known author, and I had the great pleasure of sleeping with her at the Parliament of the World's Religions. And we both agree we would have great fun joking about that later. We shared a room for one night of that event, and lovely person, and lovely to have her listening. Um, One of the things I would like to see is our churches and other organizations taking more advantage of what is out there. Um, but it's often a specialized skill in things like grant writing to do it. And we need more knowledge in that. We need classes in that. We need instruction in that. And I'm hoping that we'll see that in places such as Witch College, which is coming very shortly. And generally, all of these things, we're only just beginning to come to our fruition. We're still, in many ways, that minority community struggling to survive, right on the edge of actual survival. And this goes back to our conversation of the last couple of days. And we have to ask ourselves, what do we want to be? Um, and I think we need to find ways to take advantage of all of these resources. So often our people just fall into pointless arguing because that's easy. And, we can't complain again. We can't say that's a pagan thing. All we have to do is look at the wider society at present and see that it's a human thing. But it's not a helpful thing. The more we can do to move forward, the happier we're going to be. Um, and it is something that I don't think we think about enough as a community. And I'm hoping we think about it more as we go forward. So these are some of the different things you can do for fundraising. Other things I've seen, at the witches' balls over the years, we commonly had drawings and door prizes and things like that, that helped to raise money to pay for the event because they don't pay for themselves, at least not in advance. With the witches' balls, tickets help to pay for them, but they don't necessarily cover everything. And it's not uncommon that people who do community events end up paying for a good bit of out of pocket. One of the things I don't think most people who don't themselves organize events understand is just how much actually usually falls to the person organizing it out of their own funds. And, there are certain people who organize things like some of the major pagan pride days and some of the major festivals who, particularly after years of doing it, manage to cover all the costs. But if you watch, you'll notice they're constantly involved in it. Jacksonville Pagan Pride, one of the most successful pagan prides I've seen, but there are several fundraising events throughout the year to raise the thousands of dollars that are necessary to throw it. And Melanie, the wonderful person who organizes it, has to stay behind that effort to make sure it happens, um, to make sure that the event can take place. I don't know if Mary Hawk is with us today, who does Nashville Pagan Pride, but I'm sure she would say the same thing. Um, Now, hello to Janet in the chat room, who says the Michigan Witches Ball has always been an event that supports other pagan charities. That's wonderful. And they more than cover costs every year. That is good, and that's the sign of a very well run event. And hello to Andra in the chat room, who says this is their first time here. Welcome. And we're having a lovely interactive chat room today. That's a very good thing. Um, and but it does tend to leave me reading the chat room a little bit more than I might. Hello to Calvin in the chat room, and hello to Lady Lori in the chat room. And it's good to see you, my dear niece. Lady Lori is the first elder of the Corellian tradition, and a lovely person. And there are there's so many things people don't think about. One of the things, I was involved in for so many years was witchwool.com. People have no idea how much money it costs just to maintain the site. Um, the servers, the programming costs, um, any kind of marketing, all took a certain amount of money. And that money has to keep coming in for the program to continue. Um, things like Corellian.com, the site for the Corellian Church, that costs money. To be there, it is not a free site. And people don't stop to think about these things. Um, and as Lady Laurie says, people have no idea the expenses. And she also says Melanie does a great job with Jacksonville PPD. She certainly does. Laurie points out domain names. For example, I mentioned witchwool.com. You don't get the domain name for free. Office supplies. Um, the computers you're running it on, in many cases, have to be paid for from somewhere. And the individuals who are doing it, who are mostly volunteer, and most of these organizations aren't necessarily in a position to do that. These are all expenses of running these organizations that most people never think about. I was mentioning ink the other day. At the time I ran out of ink while putting these things together, I had no money to buy more. Luckily, it came in shortly after, and I was able to do so. But as an individual, I could only wait for that to happen. These are things that don't necessarily occur to people, and they're part of why fundraising is so important. Lolan says, does the Corellian Church have a local New York City office or contact representative? I don't know that we do, but Lady Laurie is the person to ask. Um, and Mary says, Jacksonville PPD was my first, and Nashville PPD was my second. And you're probably ruined for all the other ones after starting with those two, because they're two of the best in the country, but they're all good. Eve, and if I haven't already said hello, Eve. Hello, Eve says updating material, new material, etc. These are all things, and um, if you're concerned about things like editing, the person who writes it is not necessarily a person who's also able to edit it. Um, they're all expenses in many cases that people don't think about. And when they're not expenses, they're someone's volunteer hours because they're going to be one or the other of those two things. Um, none of it is happening automatically. Now, Lady Laurie says we have many people in New York, and if you email her, she can put you in touch with them. And her email is revlaurie@corellian.com. And And Joshua says forming a nonprofit that survives on donations does need monthly renewable income. Yes, it does. That is absolutely my point. And it requires staying non-political to remain tax-free according to 501c3. And I've been involved in a number of 501c3s, and I can tell you exactly what that means, although it might be a different program. And Byron says we have to get over the fear of asking for money and support, and that is absolutely true. So I'm going to take just a moment with why we must stay non-political as 501c3s. That means we cannot endorse specific candidates or parties. Does not mean we cannot talk about issues, but we should be careful in that. And there's also a difference between speaking as part of an organization and speaking as an individual, but you should know the intricacies of that if you're involved in a 501c3. Um, for example, I was mentioning certain things in previous broadcasts, such as Sarah Palin. But I'm not speaking here as the representative of a 501c3. I'm speaking as an individual. And I was also speaking about the nature of um, the issues that involved her name. And and Lori says to Lady Byron, there are also many things available for 501c3. This is very true, and it would be really great for us to do a show dedicated to that subject. And maybe I should talk to some of my friends who are involved in such things about putting one together. Um, it might be very valuable. But either way, we've come to the end of our half hour. Hopefully, I've not been unduly boring. And as I sit here being a talking head for half an hour, but thank you so much for interacting with me. That makes everything better. And thank you, Mary and Lori and Byron and Jeanette and Janet and Lolan and Brian and everybody in the chat room. Thank you so much. And I love you all. I love seeing you, and I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And let us close with our prayer as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, help us to see clearly the things that we need to do, the things that we love. Help us to make sure that we have the resources that we need to go forward in life and to move forward. And help us not to be afraid of asking for support when we need it. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks, and knowing you're always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence here and always. And may you now and always be blessed. And thank you for your presence, and may you also now and always be blessed. And I shall see you